Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Fountain. I'd like to welcome my guest today, Mr. Martin Chapman. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you.
So we've known Martin for well over 10 years. We've worked with Martin as a client, and we tend to have catch-ups every now and then. I thought it'd be a really lovely idea to get Martin in and basically do an interview and talk about his experience, which spans over 30 years. Public sector companies, startups, consumer finance, fintech. You've had a really interesting and varied career. Something we were talking about before the podcast was the idea that as much as there's been lots of technological advancement, maybe the theory of marketing and its application of marketing hasn't really changed that much. So I think even some of the things that we talk about today in reference to your earlier roles, I still think are really pertinent today, and I think people will enjoy listening to them. So thanks for coming in. Thanks for doing the interview. Martin, you've been in marketing for 30 years. Where did it start for you?
Marketing started in 1986, but I actually started work in 1978.
Right.
Which, just for reference, is the same year that Vladimir Zelensky was born.
Right, okay.
So I'm just saying that he's done okay in that time span, so I started work the same year he was born, 1978.
Yeah.
And I started work at a company called Norwich Union, who later became Aviva, and still are. Big insurance company based in Norwich mostly.
One of the biggest
insurance companies around, and I started work as something called a life underwriter. Didn't have a clue what that meant at the time, but it taught me a lot about risk. I was trying to insure people who wanted an amount of life insurance, and I was trying to work out what their mortality risk was to fix a premium for them. So it was risk and reward, or risk and for rate. And did that for about 8 years. Enjoyed it, actually, having no idea about sort of biology or medical science or anything, but learned quite quickly. But after 8 years doing that, I saw a job on the notice board at Norwich Union for something called a production assistant, which was what marketing was called then. There was no marketing department at Norwich Union back in the mid-80s.
And would you say that was true of other companies, or was it just Norwich Union not catching up?
I think back then that was probably quite normal. Not to have formalized marketing departments. So my first job, so I applied and got that job. My first role was something called a production assistant, which meant I wrote copy for direct mail campaigns, which were mostly aimed at our national accounts, what we called national accounts, which were the banks and the building societies that we had sort of relationships at the time. Most of our business came from independent financial advisors, IFAs, and Norwich Union was very much in need of their business. We didn't have direct to consumer business at all in those days. It was all business B2B business through IFAs. So we had to create products that IFAs liked, and they found easy to sell to consumers, but also kind of paid the right kind of commission, because they didn't have to use our products. They could choose whichever products they wanted. And that was generally a two-tier kind of process, really. We had to research what brokers wanted from us at the same time as trying to make sure that our products suited consumers.
And so was it your responsibility to write the copy for the direct mail?
Yeah.
Did you have any training at that time?
No,
so you had to work out what worked.
So I started to build up some quite close relationships with our banks and building society partners, and they helped me. I worked more with them than I did with kind of anyone else at Norwich Union, because we didn't really, it was all embryonic at that time. It was all sort of, tuck it and see. But banks and building societies wanted certain things to be said and certain things not to be said. So we would try and write copy that fitted both kind of the IFA and the bank, as well as being attractive to consumers. So it was quite a navigational process, really, and it taught me two things. One, copy at the time was something that you had to do correctly. There was no internet back then. It was you had to have a process that could tell a story through a direct mail pack, and there were some traits then that allowed you to kind of use various bits of flyer and envelope colours and all sorts of ways of building a direct mail pack that you could test to see what the response was to those kind of different tests.
Right.
So we had different kind of letters, different kind of envelopes, different colours of copy, different this, that, and the other.
Right.
So it was all a very big experiment, and we had no clue what we were doing, really. We just took the results for what they were, and stopped doing things that didn't work very well and started to do things that work better.
So you say you don't know what you were doing, but you were doing multivariate testing.
Yeah, we didn't call it that though. In those days, we didn't have any of that kind of technical terminology back then. It was just, let's see what works. And it was, I don't want to kind of downplay it too much, because it was, I suppose, for then, it was relatively sophisticated. And things changed, and we did that quite well. We did that for a couple of years. Things changed quite radically in 1987 when the Financial Services Act came into force, changed the distribution model significantly. And it it encouraged companies like Norwich Union to have both direct to consumer relationships as well as B2B relationships with brokers and banks and building societies. And in fact, it strengthened the need for insurance companies to have relationships with banks and building societies. Because what it meant was, if you didn't have a tie to a bank, they couldn't sell your products. IFAs had complete freedom to sell, and still do, had complete freedom to sell what products they chose from any insurance company. And so the risk to us was that we would lose volume. So we built a direct to consumer business to complement the IFA business and the bank and building society business.
So, okay, that's interesting. So that was, would you say that's the first time insurance companies were doing D2C marketing?
Companies like Allied Dunbar, back in that day, were largely B2C. But the big insurers like Norwich Union relied heavily, about 70-75% of all of our business came from IFAs. So we had big branch network that supported the IFA marketplace. And when the Financial Services Act came into force, that didn't change. We just added a direct consumer business to it. And we tied to some of the big banks and building societies, which we'd had less tied relationships with. We'd had relationships with them and they sold our products. But the Financial Services Act encouraged those companies, those banks and building societies to tie. And so there was a bit of a bun fight, really, between the insurance companies and the banks and building societies to tie to one or the other.
And so how did marketing in so this is kind of 1987 onwards. Were you doing the same things? Was there anything new in terms of like marketing? And was there any point where you actually started calling it marketing?
Yeah, after 1987, we started to call it a marketing department.
Yeah.
And I was one of the early members of that team. So I just sort of merged straight in from being this production assistant. I already had relationships with banks and building societies. So it made sense for me to kind of carry on with that. And because we then had 3 distinct sort of distribution channels, one being quite new to us, the B2C channel, we started to have to do a lot more kind of recognizable marketing functions, things like research and development, product development, and that took up an awful lot of effort. So the research function became very dedicated. Actually, we did a lot of qual and quant research projects, which were fascinating. You know, you'd go to London and sit behind a glass screen, and you'd pay 20 quid for someone to come in from the street, and you'd give them some questions to answer, and you then probe into the answers. And you'd watch it from a glass screen that told you what they liked and didn't like in no uncertain terms in many cases. And so we started to build our products around much more kind of sophisticated metrics.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. Okay. And so, how many years were you doing that?
That lasted until 2000. I became head of marketing for a product area. We kind of chose a relatively strange way, not strange, but a relatively unusual way to sort of structure ourselves. We had product marketeers who crossed each channel. So we would build products for B2C, B2B, and the banks and building societies. Let's call the banks and building societies B2B. And there was a sales function for each of those distribution channels. And of course, they still wanted different things from the product marketing team. So we had 2 paymasters, really. And my job, really, as a product marketeer, became much, much more sophisticated then. And my targets, which hadn't really been policed that closely until that point, became very important.
And why is that? Is it because, senior leadership, the people making decisions, saw the value in it and wanted to squeeze it more? Or is it because they were seeing it as money going out the door, there's no real attribution, so it needs to start washing its face or proving its worth?
The change in distribution channels kind of made the insurance industry a lot more kind of, I suppose, a lot more focused on results.
Right.
And so my targets were based on market share.
Right. Okay.
So I ran a few product areas, the protection market, which sounds a bit dodgy, but the life insurance market was a protection product. Pension annuities was another one of my areas, and that market in itself was worth about £4 billion a year.
Right. Okay.
So I had a market share target up in that region, and the same for mortgage protection products, life insurance, whole of life insurance, critical illness insurance products, and the whole range.
Yeah.
And each of them had a market share. Strangely enough, the insurance industry would actually have sit-down meetings and talk about their views on the market and forces that might change the shape and size of the market. And we do that as a collective. And we kind of felt that it was a more sensible way of getting a better opinion than have just our own single opinion. So if we gathered the opinions of the entire insurance market, chances are those opinions were likely to be more accurate than just your own.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that kind of thing happens anymore, but certainly it did back then. And it created a forum of product marketing managers that would rock up at different events all over the place and be able to talk cohesively about a particular market. And brokers would turn up to those events because they were learning themselves.
Yeah.
And so we became quite sophisticated about the way in which we presented ourselves as marketeers, and learned an awful lot about how product marketing actually works.
And so what was the most, towards the end of that part of your journey, what was the most senior position you held?
I was head of marketing for that particular suite of products.
Yeah, okay.
So I had responsibility for P&L responsibility for the market share of each of those product markets until 2000. Why did it change in 2000? Well, Norwich Union decided to merge with another company, and that's another insurance company. And so there were two marketing departments that then had to forge a relationship with each other and create one set of products going forward in the merged company. Yeah. And I didn't like that idea. I thought we'd advanced much further than the company we were working with. And so I decided to move on. I thought it was time for me to challenge myself in the private sector and become more accountable for my decisions. In a big company, a big corporate company like a Norwich Union, and it was that merger that created the name Aviva, ultimately about 2 years later. But I was quite I had my own style in meetings at Norwich Union, and I had peer group members that would have exactly the same responsibility of me, but for other product markets like pensions, corporate pensions, individual pensions, investments, stuff like that. And we would go into senior management meetings with our marketing director and our sales director and our finance director. And the style that I kind of adopted there led me to feel quite confident about the fact that I could enter into the private sector and do okay. Yeah. And that style was, I would sit and listen to and take the temperature of a meeting for maybe, I wouldn't say a thing, for maybe 20 minutes, which is hard to believe if you know me. And those meetings that 20 minutes would give me an opportunity to just see what people's agendas were. Yes, of course, there was a formal agenda and a chairman, as always. But very quickly, all too often, in my view, the agenda would be sidetracked by a side issue. And the main objectives of the meeting could easily get lost. And you could spend an awful lot of time talking about something quite irrelevant.
Yeah, nothing's changed in the world.
Yeah. So I would sort of sit there very quietly for 20 minutes, and then I would, quite often, someone would actually say, "Martin, what do you think?" Yeah. Because you're sat there saying nothing. Yeah. Which could look quite dangerous, I guess, because it could mean that you haven't got a clue what to say. But I would always bring it back to the core objectives of the meeting. And you could almost see the relief on the chairman's face because someone has done that. Yeah. And by the time you've spent 20 minutes listening to people postulate about, what they particularly wanted from the meeting, you could get a very good view about how this was going to go. And actually, you could pull in some of the things that had been said and actually use them to come back to the core objectives of the meeting. I still think and thought then that meetings were way too long. It's such a waste of time for the most part. In fact, I read somewhere not long ago, and I thought it was quite a good idea, that more meetings should be done stood up.
Well, the efficiency of meetings is still hard. And if you see it on LinkedIn, you see, companies that they'll test, subscribing to no meetings at all, having gone from like X amount of meetings every day to having a fixed time for a meeting to like stand-ups, agile meeting. I mean, there's all these different types of meeting structure. So it seems like nothing much has changed in the sense that there's companies out there who spend way too much time doing it.
When you join the private sector, that changes. Because generally, and certainly the companies that I worked for, there was one individual who was the owner. He was the entrepreneur. He was the business driver. They don't waste time. So meetings were short, sharp, to the point. And if you didn't make your point in the first 10 minutes, you wouldn't get that point over. Good or bad. And so that was a big change. I had no idea when I left Norwich Union what I was walking into, because I'd spent all of my career to that point in a corporate environment. I had no idea actually that when you move into the private sector, that the value that I gained from working at Norwich Union as a blue chip corporate company was actually really quite valuable in the private sector. Had no idea, because I had no point of reference.
I was going to say, probably back then, it was companies like Norwich Union, larger companies, they're the ones that could afford to do whatever the marketing at the time was.
I was trained, to an enormous extent. Every so often there would be courses on all sorts of things, negotiation skills, you name it. Everything that you could think of, and a lot you probably can't. We were trained and taught and had a lot of sort of learnings from external consultants, internal senior people who had seen it all, done it all. I mean, I remember speaking to a guy and asking him, he was an actuary actually, Norwich Union, one of the sort of boffin type, brain the size of a planet guys, and he seemed to know everything about everything. He was in his mid-40s, and there was me in my sort of mid-20s, 30s, and I went up to him one day and I said to him, how do you know so much? And he said, I read a lot. And I said, well, how can I get the same sort of level of knowledge that you've got faster? He said, well, read a lot quickly. And it was just, but actually that you can't be taught some of the stuff that you learn. I think there's a big difference between teaching and learning. My style of learning is by practical activity. If you stare at a problem for however long, it'll still be a problem. It won't go away unless you do something. And so Norwich Union taught me an awful lot. Yes, I had a lot of classroom exercises and classroom learning up to MSc level, but most of my knowledge and experience came from practical activity, doing stuff, see how it worked, and taking a lot of data analysis out of what you'd done. So you had to find ways of making sure that you could analyze data. There was a function that allowed you to analyze data from the activity that you'd done. So that was really, really important back then. Measure everything.
And I guess, that hasn't really changed. And it's interesting what you said, about the training, and that, you would have been sort of hot property, for want of a better phrase, because potential entrepreneurs, employees would have recognized, well, he probably had 4 or 5 figure training thrown at him, in a corporate. And I guess what's interesting about that, the cost of that training back then is a sort of training you can pick up for free on YouTube. now kind of negotiation. And,
Yeah.
like that sort of those basic sort of, business modules, business sector stuff. So that's really interesting. Tell us a bit more about those sort of businesses. What were they like? What were they selling?
The first business I joined when I left NU was a loan broker, finance broker.
Yeah.
The market at the time, this is 2000, the market at the time for that kind of product was buoyant and growing rapidly.
Yeah.
Consumer credit was escalating dramatically.
Yeah.
And so there were businesses that were growing exponentially, and there was quite an increase in the number of businesses that were around because of that growth. The business I joined was one of the earlier businesses in it, so it had a distribution channel mix already in place. It didn't have any internet because it didn't really exist back then. So almost all of its distribution came from direct mail campaigns. They were dabbling in radio and TV and newspaper ads, affiliates. So there were brokers that we would try and support, but the vast majority came from direct mail campaigns. So the stuff that I'd done on direct mail campaigns at Norwich Union came in really handy. But the difference was stark.
Right.
It was a vertical learning curve. I knew nothing about the business. I knew nothing about that market. But to contrast how controlled and organised Norwich Union was at making decisions, pretty much the first day I walked into this business, the entrepreneur owner gave me a textbook, a marketing textbook, direct marketing textbook, written by Drayton Bird. I've still got it. And he said, follow this. I need X number of leads, and I need them each month. I need them I don't need more than this. I don't need more than 5% over this number, and I don't need less than 95% of that number. Right. So, you've got a 10% tolerance of this number. Yeah. And the reason being, I've got an ops team sat over here. If you give me too many leads, they will cherry pick, and the cost of those leads will be lost. If you generate too few leads, I'll have people here sat on their hands. Yeah. So there's a cost to getting that number wrong. Yeah. So here's £12 million marketing budget. Right. Go get me that number of leads. And it was literally as stark as that. And were you scared? Yeah.
And were those channels already set up? Were you taking over a machine, or were you having to start from scratch?
No, I was taking over a machine that didn't include internet. It was direct mail campaigns. So I started to employ the disciplines that I'd had at Norwich Union on those distribution channels, and started to put into place some better analytics, some data analytics onto how those channels were performing. And at the time, we were saturating the direct mail market. Envelopes were falling through letterboxes at a rapid rate of knots. And of course, when you do that, the costs stay the same, but the results, the conversion levels fall. So we needed, we weren't, newspaper ads were random. You couldn't really control enough, whether you were in the Daily Mail or the Express or whatever. It didn't really kind of generate the volume of leads that we needed for our operations function to survive on. So we needed to find more distribution channels. And fortunately, around about that time, the internet was starting to show signs of life as a lead generation medium. And so we set up a very simple set of campaigns using book buying unsold inventory from places like Yahoo, AOL, which were very cheap sources of learning. So we would buy unsold inventory at pennies and to see really what we got back. Interestingly, the entrepreneur didn't like us doing that because it was something that he didn't understand.
Right.
He understood the distribution channels that he understood. And so we started very tentatively spending a percentage of the budget, which was high risk, in investing in understanding more about how internet leads worked, converted, and we started to see some signs of life with that.
And were you the person who decided, look, we have a high risk budget, and we're gonna venture into online? So you must have seen that there's something in this.
We had to really. We were forced into it because of the saturation in the direct mail world. So we had to try other revenue streams, things like yellow pages and all of that, which were much more relevant to then than they are today, were sort of dying even back then. So in a market where there was a lot of growth, the business wanted to grow, but at the same time, the distribution model wasn't functioning well enough to create that growth fast enough for the growth that was going on in the market until the internet came along. And the internet created an opportunity for consumer finance to be sold online. And so what we did was, with the unsold inventory online, we created a very simple spreadsheet, and we said, okay, well, we'll apply the same metrics that we've got to our marketing budget to our online budget. So the top 10% of converter keywords, we'll plow more money into those, and the bottom 10% of those keywords we'll take out and put somewhere else.
So you're looking
higher up.
Was that like a profitability analysis?
Yeah. So we started to look at conversion rates. My boss was only really interested in CPL, but not really that much interested in that either. He was much more interested in volume. So we started to kind of look at how conversion rates from internet generated leads in a spreadsheet made the metrics that we wanted. In other words, it played a part, it grew into a viable distribution channel quite quickly. And actually, we could then look at the metrics and analyze how each distribution channel was performing. So very quickly, within months, the internet became one of our major channels. So we were ploughing more and more of our budget into that, taking it out of other distribution channels because we were getting better conversion rates.
And what year was this, more or less?
This is about 2002, 2004.
Okay, so it's still really early in terms of like the internet.
This was embryonic stuff. This was and it was literally done on a spreadsheet. We didn't understand much about keyword functions and things like that. That was all still a mystery to us. All we looked at was, if we put in, debt loan, consolidation loan, home improvement loan, what kind of response would you get to that? And so what we realized quite quickly was actually our products didn't fit the keywords we were, they didn't kind of resonate with the keywords we were actually presenting. So we had to change our products to make them fit and resonate with a home improvement loan.
So what people were putting into search engines was obviously showing their intent and their want. And then so you basically built and changed products around that. So it's almost like you were using it as a research tool.
So it was, so things like the number one was consolidation loan, where people have got lots of credit cards and they can't control them. So they consolidated all of their credit card debt into one consolidation loan. So the word consolidation and loan, I mean, loan obviously generated lots of traffic, but not a lot of conversion. But as soon as you started to put in some specifics to trigger consumers' needs, then conversion rates started to improve. And they improved a lot more when you actually had a product behind that keyword that said consolidation loan or home improvement loan or whatever it might be, car loan.
So you said something that was interesting. So really what you were doing even in sort of 2002, 3, 4, you were doing full funnel marketing.
Yeah, we didn't know it was called
but
that.
You didn't have a name for it.
No, we didn't have a name for it.
But and it's also interesting that the entrepreneur, the owner of the business had a mindset of, I know this business works if you generate me X amount of leads. So he told you what the variances were.
Yeah. Give me the leads and I'll convert them.
But what you guys were trying to do, you weren't necessarily thinking about volume, you were looking at quality.
Yeah.
And at different stages of the funnel.
Yeah.
So did the owner of the business get won over? I mean, even though no one knew it was full funnel marketing, was he more won over to the idea that if you get past CPL, the business grows and it becomes more profitable?
Not really, not readily. Certainly, it was quite a challenge to kind of get that mindset fixed. Because I genuinely think he thought that the volume of loans, the volume of leads was everything. You know, he could convert those leads at a consistent rate, regardless of where they actually came from, until we started to show that a car loan performed differently than a home improvement loan or a consolidation loan. And it meant that the ops team could actually talk to the consumer about their needs. And that allowed a lot more loans to be processed more easily. And so slowly. But of course, I was spending budget in the owner's view, unlike the distribution model that he was comfortable with. And that caused friction. We also, at the same time, we also tried to start to bring in some corporate accounts from my new background. I thought I could speak to larger companies who were selling loans, like the big building societies, and say to them, look, what do you do with your declines? People that you can't offer a loan to. And most of them said nothing. So I said, well, you know, can we have those declines? So we were trying all sorts of ways to try and build and reduce risk from one distribution channel by having multi-distribution channels that kind of paid for themselves. But we modeled the analysis of each distribution channel to a profit level and a conversion level and an ROI level. And any channel that didn't fit those criteria didn't survive. And the money was reused into other channels. And so over the 3 years I was there, the distribution mix changed quite dramatically, and the owner wasn't comfortable because he didn't understand what was going on. He felt like he was losing a bit of control to those channels. And of course, there's only one winner in a dispute or debate like that, and I moved on. And I moved on to another finance broker doing exactly the same thing, bigger still. And they were much more receptive to distribution change. because their volume, their ops team was enormous, 600 people. And the marketing function had to supply leads at a rate of about 6 per person per day to meet the demand from that ops team.
So you say they're more open. Were they open to full funnels? Were they open to the idea of like profitability at the keyword level?
Yeah, they were much more receptive to distribution channel change. They'd got a wider distribution matrix anyway. They were just about the biggest finance broker around. Their budget, which was handed to me on a plate on day one, was around £25 million a year. So I was spending £2 million a month on marketing.
Yeah.
Again, with the same kind of requirements. I need this many leads. Don't give me too many. Don't give me too few. But at the same time, they were quite open to, and they understood that the distribution requirements of that needed to grow with it. So we built some really strong relationships with some of the bigger finance brokers and banks, and we had a very large internet chunk of our budget. And we had some brokers, but we consolidated distribution. So instead of expanding distribution, we consolidated distribution into the major providers of leads. And we built the national account kind of distribution channel dramatically. We the main attraction to doing that was if you buy a lead, you pay for it up front, regardless of whether it converts or not. So if you buy an internet lead, you got to pay for it whether it converts or not. With a bank lead, which is a customer who's applied for a loan from, I don't know, Virgin Bank, and they can't offer a loan to that customer, and so they decline it. Rather than decline it, they give it to us. We try and broker it out into a wider range of lenders on a rate for risk basis. So we would offer a service to the bank, to the customer, that says you can't have it at that rate, but you could have it at this rate. But we only paid the introducer, the Virgin Bank, if the lead converted. So the risk, so the budget was reduced dramatically. So we had two types of budget. A risk-based budget where you paid up front, like the internet, or a commission-based channel where you only paid if it converted.
So would you say that distinction between the two, you could think of it as like top of the funnel, more brand, versus your bottom of the funnel? You know, you're converting leads, and there's a guarantee to them in the sense of, you're only going to pay for them if they take the loan. I mean, it changed the dynamics of the budgeting. And that was fine. That was good. That worked fine, so long as the volume of leads came in and they converted at the ROI and conversion rates that we were looking for. And they did. You know, it grew dramatically. We had 650 people in ops. That's a big team, with a huge desire for an appetite and thirst for more and more leads. And of course, we had analysed them as well, because if the volume of leads we were supplying was something like 35,000 or more per month. So when you're generating that volume of leads, you can understand data much faster because you've got much more volume to play with. And you can also see what ops people were doing. Ops teams were grouped into teams of 6, 8,
and some teams everyone was distributed the same mix of leads, but some teams would perform differently to others. So you could see who were cherry picking, who were wasting leads, who needed more training to sell a certain type of lead, and so on. And that was all kind of ops analytics, as well as, and you coupled that with your marketing analytics of what was working through all of the normal kind of metrics. And so we were doing what I might call beyond full funnel marketing, because we were analyzing ops as well as the marketing mix as well. Again, we didn't call it that in those days. It just sort of made sense to see why there was certain things happening that you couldn't explain.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a feedback loop, isn't it?
Yeah. And so over time, that became more and more sophisticated, and we were getting quite good at it. You know, we were selling an awful lot, and we were growing quite well. And then 2008 came along. And the world changed. Pretty much overnight. You know, as people were packing up their boxes from Lehman's, you know, a lot of the finance houses were closing their shop to selling loans. So I was made redundant as a victim of my own success, really. Because I'll explain that briefly, because all of the marketing spend that was risk related stopped overnight. So all the distribution channels where we had to pay for a lead up front just stopped, because conversion levels were falling through the floor. The commission-based leads carried on, because we didn't pay for those leads unless they converted. Obviously, that dropped exponentially as well, because there were fewer products in the market, and eventually there were no products in the market. So eventually, it had to kind of cease. And that's what happened. But so the upfront risk generated leads, internet leads, just stopped overnight, because we couldn't afford to take the risk. And I became a victim of my own success because of the commission-based level of volume, which didn't really need any marketing support, because they were contractually obligated to supply us with their declines.
And that kept the company going. Risky times. And so I was made redundant on the same day as the compliance director. And you know things are going to be pretty bad when the compliance director leaves under those circumstances. And did that company go the way we might infer it went from what you've just said?
No, they survived and have grown now to a very successful company.
So after you sort of finish with this company, you're a victim of your own success, but you could look at it as you made the right moves. I mean, you de-risked lead gen for that company so they may survive and go on to grow. But in terms of where you went to next, what did that look like in terms of marketing?
Yeah, that was really quite a fortunate move, because it was a company that sold both life insurance and loans. The loans business was on its knees and was closed down very shortly after I joined. And the owner asked me whether I could generate enough leads in life insurance to allow the 30 people that were in the loans business to transfer into selling life insurance. Didn't want to make anyone redundant, which was very noble. And I said, I think so, knowing life insurance very well. And actually, you know, life insurance as a market didn't suffer anywhere near as much as the consumer finance market did. So the life insurance market was able to continue. We had to rapidly increase the number of leads for life insurance coming in to accommodate these additional people. And that led to us having to really kind of analyze what was going on in the funnel. So put it very simply, what we did was we had a great big whiteboard, and we had a diagram that showed our product process of selling life insurance through the marketing function. And what we did was we said, if a customer goes straight from the ad into all the way through the funnel and ultimately buys through all the customer touch points, without kind of giving us any aggravation at all, they would go straight from the ad to buying. That was the perfect customer. Obviously, there's lots of customer touch points and things, forms they have to fill in and stuff they have to do that led to some of those people dropping out of that funnel. And they would either, put very simply, those people that went straight through, we called yeses. Those people that went somewhere else on the website, we called don't knows. In other words, they needed more information from what we told them at that point to stop them from going through to that yes line.
Yeah.
And then there were others that just dropped out, and they were no's.
Yeah.
So we had yeses, don't knows, and no's.
And was this for one product?
This is for life insurance.
Okay, so they couldn't be looking at any other products. No. It was don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know enough information to make a decision to buy.
Yeah.
Or no, you've said something there that stopped me from doing it altogether. Too expensive or whatever.
Yeah.
So what we analysed then, and everything, whether it was a yes, no, or a don't know, went into a database. And we segmented that database into yes, no's, and don't knows.
Yeah.
And we could then analyse the results from each of those segments to see what point in that journey did they actually stop. What caused them? Was there something specific that they focused on that caused them to drop out more? And obviously, those that were don't knows, we tried to loop back into the yes line by changing something in that don't know point. And the no's, well, we had to fundamentally change something there. Whether we could do that or not, if it was price, you couldn't do much. But something had to be understood about the no's.
Yeah.
And if you could change those conversion rates and loop the don't knows back to the yes line, then it made a huge difference to the overall ROI.
So what sort of things were you changing in the don't knows? What was
lines
the
of questioning?
Yeah.
Things that led customers to look for other information. So they'd perhaps go to a Q&A box, and then you'd ask them whether that Q&A has answered that question or not. But you'd think, well, why do they need to go to a Q&A from that point? If we can answer that question at that point, they won't need to go to the Q&A, and therefore they can go straight on.
Yeah.
And the more you do that, you can tweak everything.
Yeah.
You can tweak these things. Some will work, some will not. But if you do that enough, you'll find that slowly, your ROI will improve because you're looping more and more people up through the yes line.
So in simple terms, you just made it easier and easier for people to buy.
Yeah.
Which is...
it's what you're trying to do.
It's what
as a marketeer, that's what you're there for.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And it worked. But it was through necessity, really. Because of these extra people we had a fixed budget, there was no more money because the loans business had gone. So all the revenue and income from that had just gone. So the budget that we had was lower, and we needed better results. So it was forced on us, really.
Yeah.
We had a very small marketing team at the time, but those whiteboard charts of conversion were fundamental, and we would refer to them pretty much every day.
Yeah.
As you saw the day's results come in, again, we would go back to ops and say, are these leads working for you? If not, tell us why, and so on.
And what were your, at this point in time, what were your kind of main traffic sources? Were you using Google AdWords, programmatic?
It was mostly AdWords,
Yeah.
mostly AdWords.
I assume at a time that Google Ad was relatively cheap compared to
Life insurance keywords. There's obviously there's a bunch of keywords that you can use. Some of them worked really well, some of them don't. As per usual.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel as saturated as some of the other markets that we were in. So all I would say is that when you're in a saturated market, that funnel becomes even more important.
Yeah.
So you can see things quite quickly and quite clearly using that kind of simple model of understanding customer touch point metrics, what people do at every single point that you interact with them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So you've worked that methodology through your career, but interestingly, it comes in more to its own during, say, tougher times.
Yeah.
So maybe recessions, but like you say, could also just be a saturated market because all the players were in the market. They're all trying to buy traffic.
Well, there were a lot of loan brokers there. Those that survived were trying to find other product markets to exploit.
Yeah.
And one of those was life insurance because it was a more stable market.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And so in that space, say from 2010 to 2016, 17, in terms of the lead quality. So if you were looking at, because you're measuring all these points, and I imagine lifetime value, the most valuable customers.
Yeah.
Where did they tend to come from in the spaces of consumer finance, loans, debt management? Was there a pattern to all of that?
Lifetime value. So in my world, that would be trying to get a customer to buy another product.
Yeah, so it's more, you could just look at it as highest profitability. So it might be one product, but they're giving you the most money. It could be multiple products over time. Yeah.
In life insurance terms, so certain markets will have a better ability to create a lifetime value than other product markets.
Yeah.
Like once you've bought life insurance, you don't really need it too many times. And actually, if the life insurance industry understands that a customer is buying life insurance from one insurer and another insurer and another insurer, that's a risk. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So some markets you can create lifetime values from, where you can continue to buy product after product, different products, but so like a John Lewis, say, where they can create a lifetime value, whereas certain product markets, quite difficult to do that. So in the product markets that I was in, it was quite difficult to do that.
Yeah.
So it was hand to mouth, really. You spent an amount of marketing budget and you generated a level of income. And once you've done that to one customer, it's very difficult to persuade them to buy any more.
Yeah.
Loans, you could.
Yeah.
Again, a completely different market. We learned that actually a new business sale for certain products like life insurance was probably the only sale you were going to get. So if you screwed that up, you were sunk.
So you guys,
customer just go somewhere else.
Yeah. So you actually had a disadvantage maybe to some sectors where they could be implementing full funnel.
Yeah.
They could be doing LTV analysis because they've got more than one product to sell.
Yeah.
So it's quite tight.
Yeah.
So it really does force you into that full funnel mindset because you've got to get everything out of the process.
Absolutely. You've got to sweat it.
Yeah.
You've absolutely got to sweat every lead.
Yeah.
And if you've got those metrics right, the sums would add up and the ROI and the conversion level would add up. The problem that we found, or the problem that I saw, actually not problem, opportunity that I saw from the recession was that most entrepreneurial SMEs would have knee-jerked into cutting their marketing budget, cutting their spend, cutting their marketing team, and because it's an easy hit. And I think they still do that. I think that's inherently wrong.
Yeah.
I wouldn't I? But what I found was an opportunity, or what I saw was what I thought was an opportunity. So I started to speak to CEOs about whether that's what they'd done and what the effects of that was. And it wasn't good. The effects weren't good. They were shrinking as a result of losing their marketing function. And obviously that was a function of reducing their marketing spend. But a key point that came out of that research with the CEOs was that they had lost their direction as a company, because that resided within the marketing function. And when you got rid of the marketing function, the direction was lost with it.
Yeah, I mean, the data has been fairly clear that, there's a loss of market share. The companies that really strip marketing out lose market share, and they're just not primed for that growth period kind of post-recession. And I don't think anything's changed there. The one thing that has changed is that, and if I'm being blunt, I haven't really seen any data in the past year or two, but you could argue, say from 2020 onwards, one of the things I noticed anecdotally was a lot more people were sharing that type of data. So when I go onto LinkedIn and look at people's posts, I'd see not just agencies, but in-house marketing teams as well, talking about the idea of not cutting back budget. So maybe they were sharing it because they thought it was good information. Maybe it was because they were hoping their board would see it and they wouldn't get stripped away. There's an interesting question there, I guess, advice for, because obviously you work client side, you work with entrepreneurs and different boards. Is what advice could you give to a senior marketing person or a team who are maybe hearing the murmurs of their budget being cut in a difficult time? What can they do to convince a knee-jerk board that that's a bad decision? Increase
conversion. Work that funnel. Work the funnel really hard. Because if the board is seeing a marketing function where the results are on the up, then it ceases to be a risk. If they can see a marketing function where the results are going down, you've got to understand whether that's the marketing function or whether that's the market itself.
Absolutely.
So we can probably all agree where there are market issues that are affecting marketing results. What is less easy to agree on is how efficient the marketing team is. And so what I did was I decided to walk away from the company I was working for and set up my own consultancy to try and help companies and CEOs rebuild their strategic direction. And the phone rang off the hook. And I had a whale of a time for a few years trying to help companies until I retired, pretty much. Trying to help companies with getting back on track with their strategic direction. If you ask a CEO, what's your strategy? They'll know, they'll have it off the top of their head instantly. What they may not have done quite as readily is told their staff that. Because they're worried about the effect of that. And of course, good people will leave faster than the bad people. Because they can. And a lot of CEOs won't actually tell their staff the way in which they want to go. Most CEOs of SMEs want an exit. And so they'll tell you, I want the company to be worth X million in X years' time. Okay, let's have a look at where you are now, and let's have a look at that time scale with that valuation. And how are you going to get from where you are now to that point with the results that you've seen in the last 2, 3, 5 years, whatever. And I did that so many times, and it all boiled down from a marketing point of view to the funnel. You can start to add the funnel into other parts of the business. Not just ops either. You can look at it across the entire business, because there's all sorts of inefficiencies within businesses that you can pinpoint using funnel type metrics. And if you do that across the entire business, then either a CEO's valuation is so out there, it's never going to happen, regardless of how good you can be internally, or you've got to find a buyer for that business who has a different agenda.
So once you kind of aligned on goals, with the CEO, with the C-suite, what you brought in terms of consultancy was all these things we talked about that haven't really changed, even if they've had different names, which is, assigning a number to something in a funnel and then working out, should we dial it?
So key.
And then how to dial it.
Yeah, and you can use that in a number of different ways. As I've said, you can look at it from a very small part of the business or to the entire business. To give you an example of one of the issues I found with the company that I was consulting for, they had what I would call a malfunctioning marketing department. Who relied heavily on an external agency. And they didn't understand, they just kind of gave their marketing budget to an external agency. They didn't have much of a focus on marketing internally because it was an expensive resource that they'd lost during the recession. So they kind of outsourced it to an agency. And I kind of looked at what that agency was doing for them and didn't like what I saw. So I set them a challenge, gave them some targets to hit certain metrics within a limited period of time, which they didn't like at all, because they hadn't been spotlighted at all by the company until that point, and they failed miserably. And it was at that point that I thought, well, that's good and that's bad, because I've identified an issue. Now I've got to find a solution. And the solution I came up with was a small agency that was close to me, that I didn't really know at the time, called Phantom.
That's how we met.
And that's how we met. And placed a lot of faith in what I heard from you guys. But you were saying all the right things. You were talking the same language that I was very keen on, and understanding the funnel and working the funnel hard.
And I remember one of the key things that turned the campaign around was profitability at the keyword level. I think we traffic lighted keyword sets, which hadn't been done. And that, we hadn't been around that many years, but we sort of picked that up. It definitely wasn't new to you to view that as a strategy, but I think that was one of the key things that turned that campaign around. And it wasn't a small campaign; it was spending tens of thousands a month.
It was a gamble, but it paid off. And as a result, that company has gone on to grow very, very well. In fact, they're one of the biggest in their field now. And so I had several clients during my consultancy period where that kind of relatively fundamental issue felt easy to fix. Even to the extent of listening to CEOs tell me how much they wanted their business to be worth in 2, 3, 5 years' time, and having no idea about how to get from where they were to that set of metrics. And you can even use the funnel to do that, because you look back on, well, okay, I remember one company I saw who asked me to do exactly that. And I looked at their last 10 years turnover, and it was absolutely flat. So they'd survived, they were a commercial insurance business. They had survived the recession and the crash quite well, but their turnover was absolutely flat. Traditional business, been around for a long period of time, CEO wanted to retire, lived a life of relative luxury, wanted to remain as some sort of chairman post-sale, but wanted a much bigger number than his flatline turnover suggested he was capable of generating. So my question to him was, what are you prepared to change? And he didn't really understand the question, because he'd been in that mindset of stability for years. But his requirement for an exit required change. And cut long story short, ultimately that business MBO'd.
Right.
And it kind of triggered that thought process. And we used the funnel to show that without change, he was going to carry on flatlining. And we used the funnel to show that what he needed to change could include A, B, C, or D at each point.
Yeah.
To get to a better outcome, or to get to the outcome he was looking for. And then you try to identify the changes required in order to do that.
Yeah.
And generally that means having good technology.
Yeah.
And increased productivity. And generally that means having good people.
So you showed him basically like the levers that could be pulled. Well, firstly, it's you have to make a change. Here are the levers that you could pull. And you did that as kind of an outside stimuli, if you like, which is sometimes what companies need to do, because there might be people who are championing it, but you're never a prophet in your own land, are you? So sometimes the outside voice has to come in to say, you're just going to keep getting what you've got unless you change them.
Yeah.
Which, makes sense. So just a question on teams. So obviously, I know in that period you were working as a consultancy, you were working with teams, you're obviously still allocating resource, but you had teams previously. What's your view? And maybe this is more a question and answer for internal marketeers, client side. What's your view on talent and acquiring talent and building teams?
Yeah, always look for people that do that think differently.
Yeah.
Always look for people that know stuff you don't. And measure them through what I like to call 2QTC, which is quality, quantity, time, and cost.
Okay.
So if you can get people with that mindset of operating to a quality, a quantity, a time, and a cost, and you can run projects on that basis, then you've got a really cohesive team of people working with you. And I never, ever thought that people worked for me. They always worked with me.
Yes.
And my kind of style of leadership is, and I was analysed to death by Norwich Union on this. My style of leadership is leading from the back.
Yeah.
Because I always found that leading from the back gives you clearer vision of what's going on. So if something was moving sort of out of the direction of the strategy, you could see it if you were from behind. If I would happily lead from the front when needed.
Yeah.
But I had better people than me who could lead from the front.
Okay. So you're letting them get on with it.
Yeah.
And would you say so from their perspective, it's not like you're not there, but there's not constant interfering.
No.
No.
And I think if you've got someone with the right kind of skill set. They don't want you to be over their shoulder every 5 minutes, because they're more than capable of making their own decisions. And I like people to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
But if the whole kind of model starts to move away from the direction of travel that you want it to go in, then you have to kind of try and nudge it back.
Yeah.
And people understood that with me.
Yeah.
And so we would have those kind of discussions rather than, can I do this under this kind of, with these kind of parameters and these risks, or is that too far out there?
Yeah.
And generally, we'd have a long discussion around why and how did that fit in with the overall kind of direction of travel. And it's okay. And one of the things I really kind of learned and understood along the way was that it's okay to change direction, so long as you know the direction that you're then headed in and where that might take you. And of course, there are external macroeconomic factors that might cause you and force you to change, like recessions.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of scrap what you thought originally and start again. And so many businesses don't do that.
Yeah.
They kind of try and ignore all the noise from macroeconomics and still try and go in that direction of travel that I want to exit this with this value at this point. And it's never going to happen because of all the external factors that they haven't kind of thought of, but they haven't got the flexibility to move from one direction to another to find another better place that is affected by those economic factors.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that the training you had was based on a style, and I guess every leader has their own style. Whether that style is popular or conducive to the culture that they're in, or the business they're running, is another matter. But there are some entrepreneurs, the way you kind of described it there, that they might have got success from doubling down and being pig-headed and then pushing through no matter what. But the problem is they might do that a second or a third time, maybe in an environment where the macro is very serious and they're not going to beat market conditions, essentially.
But ultimately, it can kill them.
Yeah.
The business can die.
Yeah.
And sometimes, certainly in recessionary times, and when you can't forecast macroeconomics as stably as you would like now, then your decline can be quite rapid.
Yeah.
So you have to focus on these simple metrics, but that can become quite involved in order to see problems coming and then find fixes for those problems before they bite you hard.
You on a final note, you mentioned a point earlier, which I suppose is in the digital space now easier to do, which is when you're faced with a troubled landscape, is it the market or is it marketing? It could be both, but it's much easier to see market share. Think that like the top of the funnel metrics, are we, our keyword search is down, are we losing impression share? So you can start to tell quite quickly how much of it is this the market? Are people just not searching for this, not wanting to buy this? So that can tell us quite quickly, right? Where does we need to focus on marketing now, and then start looking at the right points in the funnel, basically. And you kind of touched on that earlier. Yeah,
I mean, I think going right back to the NU days, I became a spokesman for Norwich Union with government.
Yeah.
And ended up talking to MPs in the Commons, and ultimately ended up at 10 Downing Street, and later on had a similar role with senators in the White House. So you kind of, and some of the things that you learned back then are still relevant today. They're still functioning today. And of course, people don't change that much.
No.
And the things that people want from business don't change that much. We all have our own agendas. We all need better communication. Communication is absolutely critical with any business, and for SMEs more than ever. And the people that you have in those businesses need to be told what is going on with the business at the company level. If you don't tell them that, they'll make it up.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes that won't be for the company's benefit, because they'll generally have a more negative view if you're not telling them the truth or not telling them anything, and therefore they will look for alternative outcomes for themselves.
Yes.
And that doesn't generally help the company, because you're losing your better people by doing that.
Yeah.
So if you don't communicate with them very well, or don't communicate with them at all, and I've seen that happen as well, then not through any reason other than you don't feel confident about the message or how the message would be taken by your people. But I think, to sum up, communication, honesty of communication, absolutely key. You have to be honest with your people, and if things aren't looking great, bring them into that situation, because actually everyone has a value and everyone has ideas, and the more ideas you bring into a situation, the more likely you are to find a palatable outcome.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Martin. Well, thanks for your time today. There's a lot of wisdom there, over 30 years of experience, and I'm sure people listening have got a lot from this. Thank you.
Pleasure.